On the 4th of July, 1983, Lane County, Oregon shimmered with the illusions of safety and celebration. Fireworks painted the sky in bursts of crimson and sapphire, the hum of summer insects blending with distant laughter. For neighbors in this small, tight-knit town, the holiday meant hope, a night where old worries faded beneath a canopy of exploding stars. But as the party faded and the darkness deepened, a presence slipped away unnoticed. That night, a young woman named Teresa Peroni vanished, leaving behind only the heavy silence of absence. Teresa was 27 years old, vivid, kind, the sort of person whose presence lingered in the room even after she'd left. That summer, she believed in new beginnings. She attended the 4th of July gathering with her boyfriend, Mark Sanfratello, a man whose brooding silences sometimes unsettled even close friends. Teresa's laughter carried over the music, her smile flitting between friends as sparklers fizz in the dark. But as midnight approached and the last guests wandered home, no one noticed Teresa slip into the shadows. Her shoes and purse remained, but she did not. Dawn brought unease. Teresa's friends called her name along wooded trails, retracing their steps through fields veiled in mist. The police responded quickly, interviewing every party guest and searching the banks of the Willamette River. In the Peroni household, her parents' hope began to unravel into fear. Teresa's absence became a presence of its own, a ghost haunting every hallway, every holiday. The news traveled fast in Lane County, sparking whispers of secrets and old grudges. Suspicion first fell on Mark. He claimed that he and Teresa had argued quietly, and that she'd left to clear her head. His demeanor was clipped, his gaze evasive. Neighbors recalled seeing him lingering alone, his jaw clenched as the party died down. Rumors spread about jealousy, about fights that ended with slamming doors, about Mark's reputation for brooding resentment. But the police found no evidence, no blood, no scene, no confession. Without a body, the law was powerless. Teresa became another name on a growing list of the missing. Months passed. Teresa's photo, a snapshot from the summer before, sunlight in her hair, became the face of a mystery. It hung in shop windows, at post offices, on telephone poles battered by rain and wind. The town grew used to the ache of her absence, but the Peroni family refused to let go. Teresa's mother kept her room as it was, each detail preserved like a museum of memory. Her father walked the river's edge every Sunday, hoping for the smallest sign. They clung to the hope that someday a miracle would return their daughter home. The investigation slowly unraveled. Detectives cycled through, each one inheriting a case that seemed to lead nowhere. The file thickened with notes, witness statements, and dead ends. The party guests moved on, the neighborhood shifted, and with every year, Teresa's memory became fainter in the public mind, even as it grew sharper in the hearts of her family. Then, decades later, something changed. In February 2024, a new detective arrived in Lane County. His passion was cold cases, files gone brittle with age, families worn thin by years of hope and disappointment. With him came the promise of technology undreamt of in 1983. Evidence once thought silent was re-examined. A single hair, a cigarette butt, a glass preserved for decades. The detective began to call old party guests, now scattered across states in decades. Many were surprised, some frightened, by the reopening of the case. Memories stirred. A flash of anger behind the shed, a silhouette vanishing into the tree line, a car departing long after the others. DNA analysis, once the stuff of science fiction, now breathed new life into the investigation. Labs uncovered genetic traces on objects from that long-ago night, traces that pointed with chilling certainty to Mark Sanfratello. As detectives pieced together Mark's life after Teresa's disappearance, new addresses, a changed name, a pattern of avoidance, the old suspicions hardened into evidence. What once seemed like a story finished in tragedy became the first page of a new chapter. On June 30th, 2025, after 42 years of waiting, authorities arrested and indicted Mark Sanfratello for the murder of Teresa Peroni. The news electrified Lane County. For Teresa's family, the announcement was both relief and torment. A door slammed shut, another creaked open. The entire community and the true crime world beyond was gripped by the sense that after decades of silence, the truth was finally clawing its way into the light. Yet as the headlines faded, one truth lingered. In the small hours of summer night, beneath fireworks and celebration, a life was stolen. The questions that remained about what happened, why no one saw, and what else was missed would shape the reckoning to come. The news that Mark Sanfratello had been arrested for the murder of Teresa Peroni swept through Lane County like a storm that had been gathering on the horizon for 42 years. Reporters set up outside the courthouse. Neighbors huddled in kitchens and coffee shops. And for the first time in decades, the Peroni family's phone rang with something other than condolences or memories. It rang with the possibility of justice. Yet justice, as the family would soon discover, is never as clean or as healing as they had imagined. As Mark Sanfratello was led into court, older now, his once dark hair gone gray, his back slightly stooped, he refused to meet anyone's gaze. News cameras caught the flicker of recognition, fear, and defiance in his eyes. The courtroom, once a distant symbol, became the center of Lane County's world, the place where secrets might finally be forced into the open. For Teresa's family, each day of the trial was a new form of agony. They found themselves reliving that endless summer of 1983, confronting memories they had both cherished and tried to escape. The prosecution laid out a tapestry of evidence. The old DNA, witness accounts newly clarified by time, the reconstructed timeline that painted Mark as both jealous and desperate in the hours before Teresa's disappearance. The defense, meanwhile, sowed seeds of doubt, questioning the reliability of memories faded by decades, the chain of custody for the DNA, and the motivations of those who had resurfaced after so long. The trial became more than a search for justice. It was a theater of ghosts. Witnesses from the old party took the stand, some trembling, others resolute, sharing fragments of what they had seen or heard. Old friendships were tested as stories diverged and secrets were unearthed. A former neighbor recalled seeing Mark pacing outside in the dark, his silhouette illuminated by the glow of distant fireworks. Another remembered the chilling silence that followed Teresa's disappearance, the way the community had quickly grown cautious, trust leaking away like water through a cracked foundation. But not all revelations came from the past. New evidence surfaced as the trial progressed. A receipt found in Mark's belongings, an old letter Teresa had written to a friend, voicemails recovered from tapes the family had long considered erased. These fresh pieces of the puzzle cast the events of that summer in new and disturbing light. Each day, the jury was left with more questions and answers. For the Peroni family, closure proved elusive. Sitting in the front row, Teresa's mother clutched her daughter's favorite scarf, a faded token of happier times. She wondered if she could ever forgive herself for letting Teresa out of her sight that night. Teresa's father stared straight ahead, his hands clenched so tightly that his knuckles whitened. The trial forced him to grieve anew, not just for the daughter they lost, but for 40 years spent caught between hope and despair. Every revelation, every new detail, felt like salt in an old wound. Yet amid the pain, there was a strange solidarity. Other families, with their own missing loved ones, reached out, letters, emails, even strangers approaching Peroni's in grocery stores to say, "We haven't forgotten." The trial became a rallying point, a way for the silent suffering of other families to finally be acknowledged in public. In the gallery, survivors of old cases wept together. For once, their grief was visible. Meanwhile, the trial exposed fault lines in Lane County's identity. Some residents defended Mark, unable to reconcile the man they'd known with the monster painted by prosecutors. Others whispered about the failings of law enforcement, about evidence mishandled or leads ignored. For every person who felt vindicated, another questioned their own judgment. How had a familiar neighbor been capable of such darkness? What else had gone unseen or unspoken in their midst? As the days passed, the outcome of the trial became less about certainty and more about facing the ambiguity that defines real-life justice. The prosecution's case was strong, but not perfect. The defense exploited every gap, every uncertainty in the record. The jury, made up of men and women who had grown up hearing Teresa's name, was tasked with deciding whether memory and science could together reveal a hidden truth. In the final days, both sides presented their closing arguments. The prosecution asked the jury to honor Teresa's memory by ending the silence that had protected her killer. The defense insisted that doubt, however small, should mean acquittal. In the hallway outside the courtroom, journalists whispered about rumors of new witnesses. Someone had left town years ago, another who claimed to have seen Mark and Teresa arguing by the river's edge. But perhaps the most haunting aspect of the trial was the sense that even a verdict could not truly resolve the story. For Teresa's family, justice was never going to mean restoration. The trial brought answers, but also forced them to confront the limitations of closure. There would be no reunion, no chance to say goodbye. The hardest questions, it seemed, would always be those left unasked. As the jury retired to deliberate, Lane County braced itself. In living rooms and bars, old friends and new neighbors waited for news that would define the next chapter of their shared history. The Peronis stood together outside the courthouse, the weight of 42 years pressing down upon them, knowing that whatever the outcome, they would leave the building changed. But in every corner of the community, a new question lingered. Was justice possible after so much time, so much loss? Or would the truth forever remain entangled with memory, regret, and the darkness that first descended on a summer night long ago? When the verdict in the trial of Mark Sanfratello was finally announced, the air in Lane County seemed to shift. For some, it brought a sense of long-delayed justice. For others, it was a hollow victory, one that could never truly balance the scales after decades of loss. But as the gavel fell, the story of Teresa Peroni did not end. In many ways, it only deepened, sending ripples across her family, her town, and far beyond the courthouse steps. After the headlines faded, questions lingered in every corner of the community. Some wonder how a secret could hide so long in plain sight. Others looked inward, reflecting on their own memories of that summer, questioning what they had missed or chosen to ignore. Lane County became a study in unease, a place where trust had been quietly fractured, where even familiar faces seemed tinged with uncertainty. At church gatherings, in grocery store aisles, and on quiet country roads, the conversation circled back to one theme. If Teresa could vanish, if Mark could deceive so many, what other shadows moved unnoticed among them? The Peroni family, having endured decades of anguish, now faced the ambiguous burden of closure. Teresa's mother packed away her daughter's belongings for the first time, each item sparking a fresh wave of grief. Teresa's father stood by the riverbank, remembering all the years he had searched for answers that now seemed both essential and inadequate. Closure did not mean the end of longing. It meant the start of a new, more complicated grief, colored by relief and regret in equal measure. Yet Teresa's case was no longer only a family's tragedy. Across Oregon and beyond, cold case detectives took renewed interest in their own unsolved files. Investigators wondered, was Teresa's case unique or part of a pattern? Old stories surfaced in newspapers and on true crime podcasts. Stories of other women who had disappeared under mysterious circumstances, their names long forgotten except by family and a few determined officers. Law enforcement agencies compared notes, sharing leads and methods, hoping that the same forensic breakthroughs that exposed Mark Sanfratello might unlock answers for others. In the months after the verdict, an anonymous tip led detectives to re-examine a case from a neighboring county. A young woman vanished from a fairground in 1984. Her last known companion, an older man with a temper and a borrowed pickup truck. Old evidence was sent to modern labs. DNA, once a dead end, now offered the hope of new clarity. A cluster of cold cases, once considered unrelated, began to look less like accidents and more like echoes of a pattern that stretched back farther than anyone had guessed. Media coverage of Teresa's case brought other families into the spotlight. Mothers and fathers whose children had vanished decades before reached out, their grief and hope reignited by the Peroni family's persistence. Support groups swelled with new members. For some, the public attention was a chance to finally be heard. For others, It was a reminder that answers do not always bring peace, and that the shadow of a missing loved one is never truly banished. But perhaps the most far-reaching impact of Teresa's case was what it revealed about the relentless progress of forensic science. What once seemed like science fiction, linking DNA from a faded hairbrush to a suspect 4 decades later, had become not just possible, but necessary. Cold case units across the country adopted new protocols, reviewing forgotten evidence and pushing for funding to test backlog samples. The very tools that helped solve Teresa's case became symbols of hope for families everywhere. The science that delivered one verdict became a promise that justice, though slow, is never truly out of reach. And yet, as the labs grew busier and police files grew thinner, a sobering truth remained. For every case solved, dozens remained stubbornly unsolved, haunted by bad luck, vanished witnesses, or the simple passage of time. Teresa's story served as both inspiration and warning. It showed that some secrets can be unearthed, but others may be buried forever, known only to the silent night and the shadows that watched it all unfold. As Lane County settled back into its routines, the legacy of Teresa Peroni endured. The questions her case raised continue to echo. How we move on from tragedy when so many answers come too late? Can science ever fully illuminate the dark corners of human nature? Will justice, however belated, always leave scars that never fully heal? These were not just the questions of one family or one town. They were the shared inheritance of every place touched by violence, loss, and the stubborn hope that refuses to die. Teresa's name, once nearly lost of memory, now appeared in textbooks, true crime documentaries, and the quiet prayers of strangers. Her story was a warning and a call to action. For every missing person, every unsolved crime, and every detective who won't let go, the message endures. The truth will not rest. It waits for the moment when science and persistence meet, when silence finally gives way to the voices of the past. In the end, the mystery of Teresa Peroni's disappearance may have found its answer, but the story, her story, continues. It lives in the families who still wait, the detectives who still search, and the world that must never forget what was lost beneath the fireworks on a warm Oregon night.